Elivagar, which is the stream from the Havergelmere well in Niflheim, spewed out drops of poison that froze and grew into a Jotun called Ymir. The Hrimthursar named him Orgelmir. The kin of the Hrimthursar descended from him. In the beginning, when Ymir lived, there was only Ginnungagap. There were no seas or sands, no cool waves, no grass, and no heaven. Bergelmir was born countless years before the earth was formed. His father was Trugelmir, and his grandfather was Orgelmir. Gunnar asked, "On what did Ymir live, or by what?" Gudbrand replied, "The cow Audhumla grew from the drops of hoarfrost, and 4 rivers of milk flowed from her teats to feed Ymir. Audhumla fed on rhinestones covered with salt and rime. On the first day, a man's hair grew out of the rhinestones. On the second day, a man's head, and on the third day, a whole man emerged. He was called Buri, and he was handsome, big, and mighty. He had a son named Bor, who got married to Besla, the daughter of Jotun or Hrimthurs Bolthorn. They had 3 sons, Odin, Vili, and Ve. The kin of Odin descended from them. Odin, Vili, and Ve killed Ymir, and his wounds bled so much that the whole race of Hrimthursar drowned, except for Bergelmir and his wife, who saved themselves in a flour bin. A new race of Hrimthursar descended from them. Gunnar asked, "How was the world created?" Gudbrand replied, "The earth came from Ymir's flesh, and the sea from his blood. The mountains came from his bones, the trees from his hair, and the sky from his skull. From his brow the gods created Midgard, the land of men, and the gloomy clouds came from his brain. A triad of Asar found Ask and Embla on the ground without breath, mind, blood, motion, or proper complexion. Odin gave them breath, Honir gave them mind, and Lodur gave them blood and hues, and from them humans descended." Now and then Gunnar's father would pull over at Hrafnista as he sailed past Engel with his fleet, on his way to some campaign against the Roman provinces, or while returning from one. The whole household would light up with happiness, and he couldn't help but feel a swell of pride as he beheld the impressive strides his son had made in both physical and mental pursuits. Once every couple of years, his mother would come around to visit, and she would unmistakably brim with pride for her boy. It was clear for everyone to see. Chapter 6. Gunnar attains his majority. On the final day of the 6th week of September in the Norse calendar, Gunnar celebrated his 15th birthday. It also marked the day he legally became an adult. His father Gudbrand gifted him a magnificent vessel named Elidi, a ship designed to carry a crew of up to 240 men, and fully equipped with weapons. At the top of its mast flew a golden standard embroidered by Gunnar's Raudasandur mother, with the name The Victorious, to signify good fortune for the battles to come. It is said that many incantations and spells were cast upon the ship during its creation, giving it the power to succeed in its travels. Elidi was 180 feet long, with 25 benches for rowers. It was also known as the Stallion of the Surf. Ingun was also gifted with a ship as equally impressive as Elidi, and with comparable weaponry. It was called Trani, with the poetical name the Deer of the Surf. The following day, Gudbrand and the 2 Raudasandur brothers headed to the mainland, where they pulled their boat ashore, beyond the reach of the waves. They continued their journey and reached a mighty oak forest, where they built a camp ahead of their journey. However, the purpose of the trip was different from what Gunnar and Ingun initially thought. Gudbrand left them in the forest, heading out with his dogs. However, he didn't return that evening or the next day. On the 3rd day, towards noon, Gunnar and Ingun heard dogs barking. 2 wolves ran past them. Then Gudbrand appeared, holding a dead large wolf that he took down with 2 arrows. Gudbrand's motive for this hunt was far from ordinary. He believed that by consuming the blood and heart of the wolf, Gunnar and Ingun would be instilled with its bravery and fierceness in battle. In addition, they would gain an understanding of bird language. Such was the power of the savage wolf, and because of this, Gudbrand believed that by consuming its flesh, the young men would partake of the animal's grandeur. After Gudbrand had rested, he opened up the wolf's carcass and made the 2 lads drink a mouthful of its blood. He then roasted the wolf's heart over the fire until the blood dripped from it. Dividing it into 2, he gave each a part to eat. Feeling satisfied, Gudbrand declared, "Now I expect you to never flee from danger or weapons. Be brave like your kinsmen of old." After their feast, they returned to Engel. Gudbrand and Sigrid had grown to love Gunnar as if he were their own son. The couple even decided to make both boys equal heirs to their property. Such an act, however, could only be done publicly and with the approval and consent of the direct heirs. The ceremony was called taking another into one's inheritance. and it had to follow the ancient and precise forms of law. With witnesses present, Gudbrand declared a day for taking Gunnar into the family. Ale was brewed from 3 measures of grain, and a 3-year-old bull was killed. A shoe was made from the bull's skin that was flayed from its right hind leg above the hoof. In front of Ingunn, his direct heir, Gudbrand asked Gunnar to step into the shoe. After Gunnar did so, he asked his son to do the same. Ingunn did as instructed with great willingness. After this ancient ceremony, Gunnar was embraced by his Raudasandur father and mother. Gudbrand announced in front of the witnesses, "I lead this man, Gunnar Hjorvardsson, to my property, and make him conjoint heir with my son Ingunn. I do this with the consent of my kinsmen, who are heirs to my estate." Gunnar, in turn, announced that he hoped his Raudasandur father and mother would enjoy their property for many more years. He thanked Gudbrand for raising him with much love and tenderness. After being named co-heir with Ingunn, Gunnar and his brother planned to equip the 2 ships, Elidi and Trani, with a peace crew of 120 men for each vessel. No one under 18 or over 50 years old could serve on board, and they were to follow the same laws that Sverrir imposed upon his crew. It was the first time they would be commanders or styrmen in Norse of their own ships, and both of them looked forward to it with great excitement. The Viking lands had been at peace with each other for some time, but expeditions against the Roman Empire continued, and the ships returned home with spoils and slaves. The Raudasandur brothers planned to visit their parents at Dampstadir before visiting their kinsmen who ruled over different lands. Before leaving Hrafnista, Gudbrand advised them to bring precious gifts for their hosts, as no man could refuse a gift, and givers and receivers became long-lasting friends. He presented them with several gold-ornamented swords and saxes inlaid with gold, expensive foreign cloaks, exquisite brooches of gold, stunning arm rings and necklaces. These were to be given to the high-born men and women they visited, with the necklaces being the perfect gift for their wives and daughters. On the eve of their departure, Gudbrand summoned Gunnar and Ingunn to sit with him, seeking to impart some words of wisdom. "Listen well," he began. "When you dine with strangers, speak little and observe much. Speak only if what you have to say is useful, for it is better to be thought quiet than rude. Never mock a guest or a traveller, for no one is perfect. Respect your elders, for often they have great wisdom. Love is the key to all doors of need. Be generous and do good, or face the consequences." That same night, Gudbrand gifted Ingunn with a weapon, a sword named Dragvandil, which is renowned for its victorious history. Ingunn was grateful for the gift, which he knew would undoubtedly aid him in his travels. Gudbrand also offered a formidable spear that he had taken from Harik. However, he warned Ingunn that it can only be handled by a person who has attained his full strength. Before setting out on their voyage the following day, the Raudasandur brothers made a grand sacrifice to Frey, the god of wealth and seasons. Sigrid and Gudbrand their goodbyes to the young men, wishing them well on their journey. After a smooth trip, they reached their destination, Dampstadir, where they were warmly welcomed by Sverrir and Sigurlin. The proud mother looked upon her son with admiration, for he embodied the ultimate example of manliness. Ingunn, too, was embraced with the same love, for he was cherished by all. The small town of Hrafn lay still as the autumn harvest swept across the fields, leaving everyone busy with their tasks. The champions of Sverrir were nowhere to be seen, for they were off on a distant battlefield, fighting for honor and glory. But they were returning soon enough with their tales of adventure and triumph. Meanwhile, 2 young Raudasandur brothers spent their time honing their athletic skills by sweating it out in the fields every morning. Gunnar, in particular, had a passion for shipbuilding, and he was determined to create the most magnificent vessels, earning the admiration of all his peers. He also had a soft spot for horses, and took pride in raising only the finest breeds. His 2 stallions, Slonjvir, known as the Flying One, and Hviting, had already become legendary amongst horse enthusiasts. Gunnar's love for beauty and luxury extended to his carriage as well. His stunning 4-wheeled chariot was decorated with ornate bronze-gilt ornaments, while his beloved horses wore harnesses adorned with shimmering gold. With these things keeping them productively occupied, Gunnar and Ingunn lingered in Dampstadir for 3 years. Chapter 7. Gunnar's First Expedition. At Dampstadir, Gunnar celebrated his 18th birthday, marking his transition into manhood. In those times, it was customary for young men to embark on warlike expeditions to establish themselves as skillful fighters. Great warriors and powerful chiefs only welcomed young men who had reached the age of 18, like Gunnar. Days after his birthday, Sverrir, who was at the mound of his father, summoned Gunnar. From that vantage point, they could see the graves of their kinsmen who had perished valiantly in battle and ascended to Valhalla. Sverrir wanted to impart some wisdom to Gunnar, as his father had done with him when he was about the same age as Gunnar at that point. He said, "Listen to me, Gunnar. It has been the custom for sons of chiefs to acquire wealth and honor through warlike exploits. They cannot inherit personal property, for it must be buried with them. Sons who seek to retain their father's rank and dignity must embark on warlike ventures and earn property and honors like their ancestors. Seek fame and renown in good deeds, for they will be remembered until the end of time. The names of the great skalds and the men who accomplish great deeds will never die, while the wealthy men whose sole joy in life is the accumulation of gold are soon forgotten. Listen closely, my child. Let your riches flow, both from those whom you have conquered and from the benevolent acts you perform towards others. It is the person of great generosity and courage who truly lives, while the foolish and timid one cowers in fear of the unknown. My son, always remember that good judgment is the greatest ally one can have. Should you find yourself with a wounded adversary who lies helpless before you, I trust that your sense of honor will prevent you from inflicting any further harm. To do otherwise would be nothing short of murder. And should your time on this earth come to an end upon a battlefield, then know that Odin himself has called upon you to join him. For if it is victory you find, it is because victory was bestowed upon you by the All-Father. And if it is the afterlife that awaits you, then be content, for the gleaming halls of Valhalla are filled every day with those brave and strong enough to earn their place. Strive to be one of them, for the rewards therein are great. Upon your arrival you shall know Valhalla by the wolf that looms above its gates. The hall itself is roofed with shafts and thatched with shields. Its benches are covered in chainmail, and its doors number 540. 800 Einherjar shall pass through those doors alongside you. To be there, spurting blood and clutching a chosen weapon, is the greatest honor one could hope for. It is said that Odin gives victory to his sons, wealth to some, eloquence and wisdom to a chosen few, and songs to the poets. Luck in love shall find many, and the mariners shall be guided by favorable winds. These blessings shall help guide you in your journey towards becoming worthy of your ancestors, for it is through their legacy that your own cannot help but be measured. And should you earn renown, I urge you to remain humble. Such accolades should never be cause for vanity, for fame is but a gift bestowed upon you by others. Instead, carry yourself with quiet dignity, for a person of good sense and modest demeanor is always welcomed. The prideful man is but a fool, and his laughter is often scorned. Remember always, my son, that those of noble birth and renown betray their greatness when consumed by their own pride. Sverrir spoke, presenting Gunnar with the sword Angrevadil, a magnificent weapon that boasted a damascened finish and a golden-adorned hilt. The scabbard was adorned entirely with gold. It was famous throughout the north for its impeccable quality, and the poets had given it names such as Odin's Flame, the Gleam of Battle, the Injurer of Shields, and the Leader of Victory. After Gunnar had examined the blade and expressed his marvel for it, Sverrir proceeded to add, "Angrevadil has been in our family for generations, and it is just as effective today as it was in the days of yore. Your grandfather and I have gone to 60 battles with it and have succeeded every time. This sword has never dulled, and it must never leave our family's possession, for if it does, misfortune will befall us. This weapon will even aid you in your duels. Bravery lies within its blade, terror in its point, and luck in its hilt. This sword is infallible," he finished, pointing to the golden letters etched near the hilt that spelled out a mystic message. "It is death to the one who is wounded by it. Hrotti, my sword, will be yours after my passing." Gunnar expressed his gratitude towards his father, and claimed that the sword pleased him more than any amount of plentiful gold or acres of land ever could. He claimed that he did not know what fate the Nornir had set for him, but hoped that he would die in the midst of victory. Gunnar thanked his father for all his valuable guidance and profound affection towards him, assuring him that he would do his utmost to carry on his legacy and ensure that none of his kinsmen in Valhalla would ever be ashamed of him. After leaving his father, Gunnar paid a visit to his mother and asked about the whereabouts of the cloaks Hyde, the Sibyl, had made for his father long ago. Sigurlin opened up a big chest and replied that they were still in excellent condition. Gunnar picked up the garments. They had sleeves, a hood, and a covering for the face. They were wide and long, rumoured to be invincible against iron and weapons due to the intricate craftsmanship and mystical spells woven into them. Gunnar selected the two largest ones and set off to visit Hringstadir, the estate his father gifted him upon giving him the name Gunnar. His father's words echoed in his mind, spurring him to seek wealth and fame. One morning, he and his Raudasandur brother approached Sverrir to ask about the strongest and bravest Vikings he knew. Sverrir cited Sigbrit and Sigmund, who possessed 30 ships, each with 120 men. They resided in the southern part of Fylkir. Both men stayed on land during winters and on their warships during summers. The Raudasandur brothers declared their intention to find and fight them, to see who were the greatest Vikings in the land. The next day, Sverrir's champions returned with riches acquired from Roman territories. Sverrir offered some of them to join his inexperienced son and Ingun in the upcoming battle. Gunnar and his brother quickly readied their fleet, placing their bodyguards, berserks, and selected prow defenders on the Elidi, which had been luxuriously refurbished during the winter. They were ready to defend their standard against any adversary. The entire crew was filled with berserks, warriors who excelled in strength and bravery above all others. Expert fighters were stationed at the stern, and the number of men aboard the ship totaled 240. Ingun also had a skilled crew including archers and slingers who were unmatched in the land. The flag that had been crafted by Gunnar's mother from Raudasandur flew high on the Elidi, while Ingun's flag graced the Trani. 2 days before the Raudasandur brothers' fleet set sail, Gunnar approached his father with a question. "Father," he said, "can you share with me some of the omens that could benefit us as we prepare for war?" Sverrir's response was thoughtful. Many omens can serve as warnings if one is wise enough to recognize and heed them. The Black Raven's presence is considered a good omen for warriors, signifying victory. It is ill-advised to fight when the sun, the sister of the moon, is setting. Falling or stumbling from your horse can be dangerous, for untrustworthy spirits surround you. If you are walking and meet men who praise you and then hear wolves howling from ash trees, it is a good omen to see the wolves ahead of you. These are a few of the omens to be aware of. However, beyond omens, I would also share this advice. It is not easy for a chief to acquire both wisdom and weapons essential for leading his men into battle. A leader needs foresight and should rise early to acquire wealth. A lazy warrior never gets a thigh bone, nor does an idle man obtain victory. While a sharp sword is valuable, courage is paramount when facing an angry foe. I've seen men win battles with nothing more than blunt swords. A warrior from Hedin should be silent, thoughtful and bold in battle. A Hreidar's son should be courageous rather than cowardly in battle, for old age brings no peace to those who avoid fighting, even if it spares them from spears. After this conversation the two went their separate ways. As the Raudasandur brothers prepared to set sail, Sverrir walked with them to the water's edge, bidding them farewell with affection. With the wind in their favour, they departed from Dampstadir, sails at full mast. But it wasn't long before the wind died down, and they had to rely on oars to propel their ships. As they drifted further from shore, a crow flew over them, cawing loudly. Gunnar watched the bird intently. Ingun, his brother from Raudasandur, asked, "Does the crow mean anything to you?" "It does," Gunnar replied. Another crow flew over the ship, its cries echoing through the air. Ingun stopped rowing, his oar slipping from his grasp. Gunnar asked, "You seem very focused on that crow. What is it saying?" "I'm not sure. I have trouble understanding them," Ingun admitted. A third crow flew overhead, its caws growing louder as it drew closer to the ships. Gunnar saw its approach and declared, "This is a sign. We will be victorious in our battles against the Vikings. As my father told me, the raven's presence is a good omen." Finally they reached the shores of Fylkir and anchored near a long, high promontory. They set up tents on their ships for the night and played games like chess while they waited for sleep to claim them. The chessboard had holes in each square with pegs on each piece to keep them steady despite the rolling of the ship. The next day, Gunnar explored the area and found no signs of human habitation. But as he walked across the promontory, he came upon 30 ships anchored near the beach, with war tents nearby. The members of the crew were all on land, competing in athletic games and practicing sword fighting and archery. These were the Viking warriors Sverrir had warned them about, and Gunnar raced back to his ships to share the news. Ingun asked eagerly, "What should we do now?" "We'll divide our men and our ships into 2 equal squadrons," responded Gunnar, his voice strong and steady. "Ingun, you shall take half of the ships and pass the cape. Raise a battle cry against those on shore and hoist the red shield. I will lead the other half of the crew up from this side. We'll make our way through the forest and make noise to seem as if we were raising another battle cry. With luck, they may be startled by our sudden appearance and retreat into the forest. Nothing further might happen. And so Ingun rounded the cape with his ships, while Gunnar and his men landed on the other side, ready for action. They executed Gunnar's plan perfectly, but Sigmund, Sigbrit, and their men were not fazed by the battle cry of Ingun sounding from the sea as well as on land. They stopped their games, but resumed them once the noise died down. Ingun went ashore to meet with Gunnar, and after the two groups merged, Gunnar spoke. I don't know if they're afraid of us or not, since they didn't seem to mind our war cry. What should we do now? Ingun asked. It's simple, replied Gunnar, with a sly grin on his face. We won't surprise them yet. We'll stay here at the cape and wait until morning. And so they did. When the sun lifted the veil of darkness, the Raudasandur brothers and their men landed, marching towards Sigbrit and Sigmund, who had prepared themselves with armor and weapons, ready for war. Seeing Ingun and Gunnar coming towards them, Sigmund and Sigbrit made their way to meet the oncoming threat. Sigbrit was a great Viking, high-born and well-travelled, having seen places that most people hadn't. He was short, with grey hair that was beginning to fall out. He was the oldest of the four chiefs. Sigmund was also high-born, younger than Sigbrit, but older than Gunnar and Ingun. Sigbrit was the first to speak. Who is your leader? Gunnar replied with pride. There is more than one chief among us. Sigmund, curious, asked Gunnar, What is your name? I am Gunnar, son of Sverrir of Damstadir, and my Raudasandur brother is Ingun, son of Gudbrand of Engel, responded Gunnar, with his chin held high. Sigbrit then asked, What brings you here? Gunnar answered, his voice confident, I want to know who among us is the more powerful. Sigbrit, sensing a challenge, asked, How many ships do you have? We have 20 ships, Gunnar announced. He then inquired, And how many do you have? We have 30 ships, Sigbrit boasted, with a hint of smugness. Gunnar and Sigbrit faced off on the battlefield, their armies arrayed behind them. Great odds are against us, remarked Gunnar, surveying his opponent's forces. 10 ships' crews shall not take part in the battle, replied Sigbrit firmly, and man shall fight against man. This is fair, acknowledged Gunnar, admiring his opponent's sense of honour. And it is the law of valiant men. With that, both sides launched into battle, swords clanging and shields clashing as they fought fiercely for hours on end. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, a peace shield was raised, and Sigbrit approached Gunnar. What do you think of this day's conflict? He inquired. I am well pleased, replied Gunnar, a note of satisfaction in his voice. Will you play the game again? Asked Sigbrit, ever the strategist. That is my intention, announced Gunnar, for I've never found better and hardier champions. We will begin the battle again at full daylight. With that, the warriors retreated to their war booths, tending their wounds and preparing for the next day's fight. When morning dawned, they once more arrayed their armies and charged into conflict with fierce determination. Once again, the battle raged on throughout the day, each side pushing themselves to the limit. As night approached, the peace shield was raised, and Sigbrit approached Gunnar once more. How did the fighting please you on this day? He asked inquisitively. Very well, replied Gunnar, feeling a sense of respect for his opponent growing within him. Will you then try this game the third day? Sigbrit asked, his tone almost challenging now. It was Gunnar's turn to pause for a moment before replying. Then we will finish the fight, he declared firmly. Sigbrit, sensing an opportunity for success, decided to broach a new idea. May we expect much booty on your ships if we gain the victory? He asked slyly. Far from it, replied Gunnar honestly. We have taken none this summer. I think I have nowhere met more foolish men than here, observed Sigbrit with a wry smile. For we only fight out of pride and rivalry. What will you do then? Inquired Gunnar, curious about his opponent's next move. Let us become Raudasandur brothers, suggested Sigbrit, for we are of equal valor. Well said, agreed Gunnar and Ingun, seeing the wisdom in his suggestion. For we think it right that we should bind our friendship and swear Raudasandur brotherhood to one another. It will be a great boon for us all, as we four will become the greatest warriors and Vikings of the land. The following morning, preparations were made to carry out the proposal of the previous day. Gunnar and Ingun were to become Raudasandur brothers with Sigmund and Sigbrit. This was not a decision to be taken lightly, for the Raudasandur brotherhood was a most sacred and binding pact, requiring those who swore it to be unselfish and true to each other for life, and to share the same dangers. But for these warriors, it was a pact that they knew would ensure their success on the battlefield and cement their legacy for generations to come. 4 Vikings began the ceremony by cutting 3 long slices of turf in a semicircular shape. The ends of the turf were firmly fixed into the ground, forming loops high enough for the participants to go under. At the center of these loops, they planted a spear that was inlaid with mystic signs. The spear's height allowed a man to reach the nail that held the socket of the spear point to the handle with his hand. The warriors from both sides gathered to witness the sacred ceremony as the sun shone brilliantly on a beautiful summer day. Nature was smiling in its glorious form, and birds, bees, and butterflies were frolicking among a variety of wildflowers. Nobody could have ever thought that such a fierce conflict had occurred just days before. The ambience of profound silence pervaded as Sigbrit stepped forward towards Gunnar and the other 3 Vikings. He began by saying, "You are aware that it has been the custom of valiant men from time immemorial to agree upon Rauda brotherhood. The one that lives the longest should avenge the others if they are slain with weapons or otherwise." Gunnar, Ingunn, and Sigmund vigorously replied, "Yes, we are aware." They then prepared for the oath of Rauda brotherhood, which was sacredly binding, although not taken on the temple ring as oaths generally were. Sigbrit, Ingunn, Sigmund, and Gunnar passed under the loop and drew blood from the hollow of their hands. Then they let the blood run together into the mold cut under the loop of the turf. They mixed the earth and blood and fell on their knees. The 4 Vikings took oaths to ratify their agreement and called upon Odin, Frey, Njord, and other gods as witnesses. They clasped hands according to ancient custom, sealing their oaths. The 4 Rauda brothers agreed never to rob traders, bondi, or other men, except when they must make a raid on land to support their men in case of need. In such a case, they were to pay full value for what they took. They also vowed never to rob women or bring them on board their ships against their will. Should a woman show that such a crime had been committed against her will, the man of the crew who is found guilty of the crime should lose his life for it, whether he was powerful or not. The 4 Rauda brothers had made a pact that they would share their loot from Viking expeditions, and that the longest living brother would have a grand mound built to honor them after death, filled with treasures befitting their status. And so, till their very end, they held each other in high regard, never faltering in their sworn duties to their brotherhood of Rauda. Together, they decided to visit Sigbrit's father Gudmund, a mighty Hreidar who ruled over Åland, which was situated near present-day Sweden. They sailed to his domain, and after a pleasant journey, landed in a bay where now stands the quaint little town of Borgholm. They were accorded a warm welcome, with great feasts and endless revelry. During their stay, Gunnar was seated in the second high seat. The brothers prepared to sail onward, intending to visit Gudbrand to inform him of their new pact. Before they departed, Gudmund presented Sigbrit with 3 arrows imbued with magical powers called Gusi's followers. These arrows, he revealed, could strike anything and leave a lasting mark. They were crafted long ago by the Dvergurs, and were taken from Gusi, the ruler of the Finns, by Arnbjorn Hoeng, who was Sigbrit's great-great-grandfather. Sigbrit was grateful for the gift and expressed his gratitude to his father. They set sail from the town and travelled for a short while, landing at a bay surrounded by many grave sites, which today bear the name Simbrisham. These graves held magnificent bronze weapons and gold objects that lay untouched for centuries. They arrived to find chaos, as everyone awaited the commencement of a trial by ordeal. Hjörka, a bondwoman, had informed the ruling Hreidar Vemund that she had seen his wife, Gunvor, walking with a man from the Herad. Vemund adored his wife, so he was distraught upon hearing the news. However, he could not take action until he was sure that the accusation was true. Unfortunately, he had not yet been able to prove it, and nobody had ever been seen with Gunvor. Despite this, Vemund's jealousy consumed him. One day, while speaking to his wife, his sorrow was so obvious that Gunvor asked him why he was so downcast. He responded by telling her that he believed she loved another. The accusation left Gunvor speechless with anger, as well as pain and sorrow that her husband could even suspect her of betrayal. She vehemently denied the charge, and offered to take an oath on the white holy stone before many witnesses. Gunvor asked for Halfdan, the ruler of Zealand, to consecrate the boiling cauldron as a sign of her innocence. The Rauda brothers were just in time to witness the trial. Halfdan was summoned, and in front of hundreds of spectators gathered for the ordeal, he consecrated the cauldron with the hammer of Thor and the holy white stone that would be employed. Gunvor spoke out loudly so that all present could hear her words. "I cannot ask my brothers to avenge me with their swords, as they are all dead. Behold, men, I speak the truth. Look at how the water boils. Let Herkia, who accuses me of treachery, approach the cauldron." Herkia reached into the cauldron to retrieve the sacred stone, and the audience watched with pity as her hands were scalded. This sight proved to the people that Herkia was guilty of false accusations and perjury. They then led her to an unclean mire where she met her end. The next day, Knut, Sigbritt's old uncle, felt his end was near. With peace all around, he knew he couldn't die on the battlefield and join his fellow warriors in Valhalla. He didn't want to end up in hell either, because it was believed that only those who died by weapons went there. Hell was one of the 9 worlds of the universe, but no punishment awaited there. Knut summoned his family and divided his wealth among them, determined to die with honor. He said he would throw himself off a high cliff, as doing so typically led to entrance into Valhalla. His family accompanied him to the edge of the precipice, bidding him farewell to Valhalla as he took the fatal leap. A grand mound was raised over his remains, and the people praised his bravery. The 4 Raudasandur brothers continued their voyage after witnessing Knut's deed. They sailed past beautiful burgs and estates along the peninsula before anchoring on a river near an island. They didn't stop at Hrafnista, where Gudbrand and Sigurlin had gone to visit their friends living along the shores of what is now called the Christiana Fjord. There, Gautrek the Old, a valiant Hreidar, ruled. He had been a fierce Viking in his prime, but had since retired from warfare due to his advanced age. He had 9 sons with Alvig the Wise, Eyvind of Holmgard's daughter. The sons, Thengil, Raesir, Gram, Gylfi, Hilmir, Jofur, Tiggy, Skuli, and Harry, went on to become renowned warriors, with their names used as ranks in songs. Unfortunately, they all died in battle without ever marrying. A lavish feast had been prepared for Gunnar, his Raudasandur brothers, and their men. Gautrek, the host, had a daughter by the name of Svanhild, who was stunningly beautiful. As the guests were seated, she entered the hall accompanied by her handmaidens, and made her way to the high seat where Gunnar sat, opposite her father. Svanhild handed Gunnar a golden drinking horn filled with mead, and warmly greeted him and all the warriors who had accompanied him. She then took her seat by her father, and the feast began. As was the custom of those times, the visit lasted for 3 days, during which there was an abundance of food and drink, and no shortage of merrymaking. The visit came to an end, and Gunnar and his men departed. The fleet sailed northward, with the Elidi leading the way, thanks to her superior speed. The fleet took shelter behind islands that punctuated the coastline, preparing to enter the Hams River where Hamstad, now known as Halland, is situated. As the ships headed toward the shore, they hoisted the peace shields and placed shields along the gunwales. The shining red-gold dragons that adorned the ships glittered in the sun's rays, making for a spectacular sight. Arnfrid Hreidar was the ruler of the land, and he sat on his father's mound that overlooked the river and the sea. He would often go there and hunt with his hawks. Upon spotting the Elidi by its pennant, he recognized the ship and knew its commander was none other than Gunnar, the son of his fellow warrior and Raudasandur brother Sverrir. The ships would disappear from view due to the bends in the river, which were thick with forests. However, they eventually cast anchor below Arnfrid's burg, or residence. Arnfrid sent messengers to invite Gunnar and his Raudasandur brothers, along with their men, to disembark as his kingdom had never been ravaged by Gotlanders. Gunnar accepted the invitation, and they made their way ashore to the awaiting welcome. Gunnar spoke to his friends and followers, cautioning them against drinking to excess. He stressed the importance of sound wit and common sense on their journey, reminding them that wisdom is crucial for those who travel far and wide. Too much ale, he warned, would weigh them down more than any provisions they carried. He disputed the common belief that ale was superior, pointing out that the more a person drank, the less sense they possessed. The spirit of drunkenness, he said, was called the heron of oblivion, as it steals away a person's senses. The best ale, he concluded, was the kind that allowed every man to retain his reason. Drinking excessively had led to strife, grief, and even death for some. Gunnar urged his companions to avoid quarreling with drunken men and to drink responsibly. After delivering his words of warning, Gunnar and his men dressed in their finest clothing and went ashore. They were led to a banquet hall where a grand feast awaited them in their honor. Arnfrid, the host, welcomed them and invited Gunnar to sit at the high seat opposite his own. Arnfrid had a beautiful daughter named Ingigerd, who was renowned for her beauty and accomplishments. Before the feast began, she arrived at the hall accompanied by other young maidens. They were dressed beautifully, and Ingigerd herself wore a rich red dress embroidered with gold. The material had been brought to her by her father on his return from a voyage to the Caspian. Her hair was braided and fell gracefully over her shoulders, and a beautiful gold band encircled her forehead. Her neck was adorned with a necklace of delicate gold beads, while a belt of gold encircled her waist, enhancing her tall, slender form. She wore 2 delicate spiral gold bracelets on her arms, and on one of her fingers was a spiral ring ending in snakes' heads that once belonged to her mother. Before the feast began, Arnfrid declared that the seating arrangements were soon to be determined. Men and women were allowed to drink together as long as they desired it, but those without companions were to drink separately. They drew lots from a piece of cloth, each bearing the name of a guest, and Arnfrid was to be the picker. It was decided that Gunnar would sit near and drink with Ingigerd that night. As they were about to be seated, Ingigerd arrogantly sang to Gunnar, "What business have you in my seat, young man? For you have rarely, if ever, fed a wolf warm flesh, nor witnessed a raven croak over a battlefield, nor have you been to the place where swords meet, and where Hedin ascends above the fallen." Her words meant that Gunnar had never been in battle. No wolf, raven, or Hedin had ever followed him. Therefore, if this was true, he was not worthy of being seated beside her. Gunnar gazed at her proud yet beautiful countenance and sang, "I have wielded the bloody blade, and the ravens have followed my trail. I have battled hard and been the victor in many tests of strength and skill. Be not so haughty, maiden. Just like you, I also come from Odin's lineage. The son of Sverrir follows in his father's footsteps." Upon hearing these words, Ingigerd smiled at him, seated herself by his side, and they drank together and revelled in merry company. Many maidens were seated beside strong and mighty champions that day, men who had travelled to many places. There was nothing that these Scandinavian women valued more than personal bravery, and only the most valiant could hope to win the hand of those of high rank. Wine, ale, beer, and mead were served in drinking glasses made either of glass from Greece or crafted in silver with elaborate designs of repousse work of gold, portraying panthers chasing deer and horses fleeing, all of which had come from the Black Sea where the Greeks had settled. Silver vases were served containing roast pork, veal, birds, and fish. There were 2 types of bread on the table, one soft and made of rye, and the other flat and nearly as slim as wafers, the same kind that is served in Norway today. When the raucous revelries of the men in the hall became too much for the women present, Ingigerd and her companions took their leave, bidding the others good night. Yet sleep eluded Ingigerd that night. Her thoughts kept returning to Gunnar, and without quite realizing it, she had fallen for him. Or perhaps it was more infatuation than love. The next day, Ingigerd concocted a drink of forgetfulness for Gunnar, just in case he had another woman on his mind. She sent her maid to invite him to her bower, where she presented him with the potion she had prepared. It was a mystical brew made from ice-cold seawater, sacrificed blood, an unripe wheat ear, sacrificed beast intestines, forest herbs, and other accoutrements, all added according to ancient and mystical rituals. Gunnar drank the potion, but whether it truly worked could not be proven, as he had no lover to forget. On the 3rd day, the Raudasandur brothers prepared to leave. Arnfrid urged them to stay longer, but Gunnar said, "One should leave at the right time. A guest should not overstay their welcome, for loved ones can become loathed after many days." And with that, they parted on a note of great friendship. Arnfrid gifted Gunnar with a splendid sword with a hilt and scabbard made of gold, as well as a finely crafted axe inlaid with gold. He also presented his own Raudasandur brothers and their men with valuable gifts. In return, Gunnar presented Arnfrid and his men with equally expensive offerings. From her bower, Ingigerd watched the ships sail away with a heavy heart, wondering if she would ever see Gunnar again. As is often the way of the world, Gunnar and Ingigerd were never to meet again. The Nornir had decided to separate them for life, preventing them from continuing the courtship that Ingigerd had so deeply desired. The memory of those brief, beautiful hours spent with Gunnar was all that she had left. It was just a dream, but what a lovely and poignant dream it was. Love had sprouted and flourished within 3 short days, but unfortunately its fate was sealed, even though those tender moments were never likely to be forgotten. Ingigerd ultimately tied the knot, but her mind often drifted back to those unforgettable days gone by, even if she knew it was wrong to dwell on the past. Thoughts often come back uninvited, lingering until our dying breath. It's a good thing that no one can read our minds, for if they could, many happy relationships might suddenly turn unhappy in the blink of an eye. After leaving Arnfrid, the Raudasandur brothers made their way to Engelholm, where Gudbrand and Sigrid had returned. Their arrival was greeted with great joy in Hrafnista. Ingunn decided to stay home that winter. Gunnar, along with Sigbrit and Sigmund, sailed to Dampstadir so that his father could meet his two new Raudasandur siblings. They were poised to spend the winter together with plans to reunite the following spring. On the shoreline stood Sverrir and Sigrid, eagerly anticipating their son's arrival. They were already aware of the goings-on as Gunmar had written them a letter containing details of the fight and its aftermath. When the time came, they warmly welcomed the Raudasandur brothers to Dampstadir. Chapter 8. The Yule Sacrifice. Sverrir fervently performed his religious duties, meticulously observing every sacrificial rite. The main temple, belonging to the deity Hrafn, was located at Dampstadir. All those on the island paid a temple fee toward the support of the sacred space and its rituals. Nestled between the city walls and the tombs of Sverrir's forefathers, the temple was a typical structure found across Viking lands, subject to the same general laws as its counterparts. Its wooden walls, crafted from fir trees and spanning a staggering 250 feet by 125 feet, had withstood the test of time. It boasted a wealth of quirky gargoyles and an expansive porch with two principal sections, the innermost being the holier sanctum. The precinct enveloping the temple, including the land, groves, and springs within, were deemed sacred. No one could enter bearing weapons or having committed various offences. Quarrelling or causing disruption within its walls was strictly forbidden. Knowingly transgressing these rules would render one an outlaw, a wolf within the sanctuary, indefinitely subject to anyone's slaying. As one passed through the primary entrance, one would come across the golden high chairs where Sverrir, acting as Hreidar and high priest, held court. Everything from the temple's timber down to the earth beneath it carried a profound holy significance. The interior walls glistened with precious metals, ornamentation, and tapestries, and the door featured a striking gold knocker. In the holiest section of the temple was the built, masterfully altar. It was always aglow with a flame known as the holy fire, which would never extinguish. On this altar was a large gold ring or bracelet that served as an oath-taking device, and a copper bowl that was used to hold the sacrifice's blood. Both the vessel and its contents were given reverence. A short distance from the temple's entrance was a holy spring where the sacrificed were thrown. In the Viking lands, 3 major sacrifices were held every year, and these brought people together at the chief temple. The first sacrifice, known as winter, occurred in the month of Goi, now known as October. This was a time to welcome the winter months, and the festivities included grand feasts and plentiful drinking. The midwinter sacrifice, also called Yule, happened in the month of Thor, at the heart of the winter season. This was the greatest sacrifice to Frey, made to ensure a good year and lasting peace. And finally, the victory sacrifice, to give honor to Odin and to pray for luck and triumph. This took place at the beginning of April, just before Viking expeditions began. Gunnar returned to Dampstadir after the winter sacrifice, where all the Baltic Vikings who had not wintered elsewhere had gathered. If they arrived too late, a frozen sea would prevent their vessels from reaching their destination, although the shores of Zealand, Fyen, and Norway were, with rare exceptions, free from ice throughout the year. Yule was nearly upon them, and the midwinter sacrifice, the most important of all, was to be held on a grand scale at Dampstadir. More animals than usual had been fattened for the occasion, including black oxen, horses, boars, and falcons. People from all over flocked to Dampstadir, bringing provisions and ale for the festival. The day before Yule, everyone had arrived to be present at the sacrifice. As customary, Sverrir and the assembly led in the procession of the atonement boar that had been consecrated to Frey. It was a magnificent animal, its bristles seemingly made of gold. According to the sacred rites, those who were to make vows placed their hands on the boar's head and its bristles. Among the chiefs and high-born men making vows were Hreidar Harmund the Valiant, the Berserk Hromund the Bold, Ingald the Black-Eyed, and Gunnar. On the first evening, the sacrificial ceremonies commenced with an eerie silence as the animals were ceremoniously slaughtered. Their blood was drained and collected into a large bowl that had been taken from the altar. Once full, the bowl was placed back on the altar and sanctified by Sverrir, who was the high priest. With the sign of the hammer of Thor, he consecrated the bowl of blood. The temple walls and altar were then smothered with the blood, as were the people in attendance. The sacred twigs were especially used for the purpose of sanctification. As the people were sprinkled with blood, the flesh of the slaughtered animals was placed in large sacrificial kettles that were then hung above the holy fires that burned right through the middle of the temple. Sverrir consecrated the food with the sign of Thor's hammer. When the food was ready, the horns were filled with ale and carried around the fires. Each horn was also consecrated. After these sacred ceremonies, the people seated themselves along the walls of the temple and began to eat the sacrificial meat of oxen and horses. Since time immemorial, it was customary to drink the horn or toast to Odin first. It was a prayer for victory and the continuance of Sverrir's power. The horn to Thor then followed for those who relied on their own strength and power. Then came the horns to Njord and Frey for prosperity and peace. The last was a toast to Bragi, the god of poetry. According to custom, it was during this toast that vows were made, and these vows should be kept throughout the year. This was the most important toast, for those who failed to accomplish their vows would perish. Many also drank a well-filled horn in memory of their deceased kinsmen who had been great men. They were known as memorial horns. When the drinking was over, Sverrir rose again. He then made a vow to drive every Roman vessel away from the sea. They were to be seen along the coast of Gaul, Britain, and Frisia, or die in the attempt. Hromund the Bold was the next to rise. He responded by saying, "Sverrir, your vow is weak. It takes little strength and will to drive the Romans from the sea. Make a stronger vow that will show your daring and bravery. Then I will follow you and make my own." Sverrir spoke up, agreeing with Hromund. "Yes, you are right. I vow that I will wage war in Gaul and Britain and return with great booty. Moreover, I will sacrifice any prisoners I capture and anoint the altar of the gods with their blood. I also swear that if any Roman vessel ever dare venture onto our shores, as they have never done before, not a single one of its men will leave alive to report back about our land." "That is a stronger vow than before, Raudasandur, brother," Hromund said, "but there is hardly any need to worry about them ever coming to our land. They fear our people and our ships. Their warships flee at the mere hint of encountering our fleets. However, I do like the vows you've made to attack them in their Gaulish and British strongholds." Rising to his feet, Hromund made his vow, proclaiming, "I swear that I will follow you, Sverrir, in your expeditions against the Romans, with all my ships and warriors. I will return with you if you come back, or I will die a warrior's death if you must go to Valhalla on your journey. As Raudasandur brothers, we have sworn to avenge each other." Then Hamund the Valiant stood up and pledged his loyalty. "I vow to follow you, Sverrir and Hromund the Bold, with all my ships and warriors, and together we will lay waste to the Roman Empire's provinces. We will venture into the Mediterranean and show the Romans that they cannot withstand the might of the Norsemen on land or sea." Ingald the Black-Eyed followed suit. "I take the oath to follow you all and set up my standard on the shores of Britain. I will establish a settlement on that island that the Roman Empire will not dare to threaten, or I shall die trying." At this point, Gunnar rose and vowed to accompany his father on the expedition or die alongside him. Many of the other men also made their vows that night. After the vows were made, the group moved on to memorial toasts for their deceased kinsmen. The atmosphere was solemn and impressive, since some of those who were to be remembered were only recently deceased, while others had passed away centuries prior, immortalized in tales of their heroic deeds. Together, they had helped shape the land of the Vikings into the most feared of all lands. After honoring their departed relatives, those gathered stood up and pledged to continue in their ancestors' footsteps. Those who couldn't make it to the temple held their own sacrifices at home. The festivities among the people lasted for 13 days, and many spent half of Yule at each other's farms. The following April, after the offering to Odin for victory, warriors across the northern lands prepared their ships for powerful expeditions against the Roman Empire. Even the shores of the Mediterranean were also to be attacked. Many Vikings also intended to bolster the colonies established by their kin in Britain, Gaul, Friesland, and other lands while also settling there. Sverrir and the other powerful chiefs who took oaths at the previous Yule sacrifice at Dampstadir hadn't forgotten them. They prepared extensively for war and conquest, with Sverrir chiefly responsible for such a great upheaval. A warlike message went out to every inhabited place in the land, and every youth wanted to be among those marching forth. All who were bound by law to provide a warship or more had been called to arms by the Hersirs. Sverrir gathered a fleet of several hundred vessels. Those who followed him did so with great fervor. Many brave warriors from the north joined his standard, for they knew that victory would follow. They came from the shores of present-day Norway, the Kattegat, the islands of the Baltic, and the southern shores of that sea. They all knew they were the gods chosen, and that they would prevail. Weapon things or meetings were held everywhere. At these meetings, all the freemen were required to show swords, spears, axe, and shields, in perfect condition. Every bondi had to be ready at the designated spot, as the war arrow had summoned them, with 1 bow and 24 arrows for each bench of the ship or ships they were obliged to provide. Ingun arrived at Dampstadir from Engel with 100 ships. The next day, several of his kinsmen came with an additional 200 ships. Among the newcomers were the berserk Sigvaldi with 20 ships, Tryggvi with 15, Trividil with 9, and Starkard with a single skeed manned only by berserks who constantly had the berserk fury upon them. Helsing came with 3 ships, with a crew primarily composed of skilled archers and slingmen, or stone-throwers. These men travelled north of the present Christiania fjord. To the great joy of Gunnar and Ingun, Sigmund and Sigbrit also arrived with 50 fine vessels each. Every one of these had a crew of 220 men. The sea before Dampstadir was like a forest, but teeming with masts instead of trees. The Vikings valued their ships above all else. They poured their wealth and skill into the creation of these vessels, and competed among themselves to have the finest craft. Sverrir's dragon ship was the most powerful of all the warships assembled before Dampstadir. Its pennant, which floated at its masthead, was embroidered with gold and bore the representation of Odin's ravens, Hugin and Munin. Before departing for battle, Gunnar and Ingun sought the counsel of a sibyl named Helga. She had the power to find the vulnerable spot that would be wounded unless she protected it through her incantations. The Raudasandor brothers wore charmed chain armor that no weapon could penetrate. During Sverrir's absence, Sigrlinn was to rule over the estates. The horns signaled that it was time for departure, and soon enough the ships were on their way to the south. After sailing for 2 days, they reached Hlydra, the head burg of Halfdan, the powerful ruler of Zealand. There they met an equally powerful fleet that Halfdan had summoned. The sound between Helsingor and Helsingborg on the Swedish coast was congested with masts, blocking the sea from view.